from just €213 per month, so you pay for the car, not the loan. Or a minimum of €3,000 scrappage, or 3 years free servicing. Visit your local Opel dealership today, as offer ends 31st of January. Opel, the future is everyone's. Lending criteria, terms and conditions apply. Hire purchase agreement provided by Bank of Ireland Trading as Bank of Ireland Finance.
Discover a new dimension of freshness with Whirlpool's Fresh Care washing machine range. Fresh Care keeps your fabrics fresh for up to 6 hours after the cycle is finished. For more information, go online to powercity.ie or call in store today.
Whatever's on your list, come in and see how much you can save at Lidl. Check out our 3 for €9 mix and match meats like our fresh Irish flat iron steaks, fresh Irish diced stewing beef and smoked Coley fillets. And try our big brand super savers like Heinz tomato ketchup, just $1.99, and Comfort fabric softener, only $2.49. Lidl, more for you.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
Yeah, it's that time of the week again. It's time for the Sunday paper review, and there's loads on, and we're joined by Cliona Foley from Off the Bench and lots of other sports publications, and also Sarah O'Connor, who's the head of sport of WH. Before we get talking to the ladies, we'll just do a quick run through of the headlines. We'll start with the broadsheets. And there's a mixed bag really this week. We've a great photo here of Connacht Munster. You can just see there the intensity going on, and that really was the rugby match we had last night. Not that I'm bitter at all that I was at the RDS. And then the Sunday Times has a brilliant photo of Rob Kearney actually in action as well. And we were talking earlier about how we've a real mix of experience and youth coming in there in Leinster, and it's great to see, and it just shows the procession line of rugby is very much in safe hands under Leo Cullen at the moment there in that part of the world, and also Ulster fighting valiantly as well. Also thinking about all looking forward to Toulouse next weekend. The Sunday Mirror here on the back page, it's Jurgen Klopp, you'll cop the title, Jurgen. This is when the mind games are beginning now after last Thursday's match with City and Liverpool. Of course, everyone's saying now this is Liverpool's to lose, which if anybody knows Liverpool knows that's quite dangerous. Again, here's another one, Star on Sunday, Silvermare, Klopp, only title win is enough to silence doubters. And we also have a picture of Gillingham, we were talking earlier about the FA Cup, and apparently Moyes going for Stoke, an exclusive by Harry Pratt, and apparently David Moyes would be interested in coming Stoke boss. We move on to, what have I got here? We have the Irish Mail on Sunday, and Reds on a roll. Carbery on fire as Munster power home against Connacht to boost confidence for European challenge, and that score as it was Connacht 24, Munster 31. And Top Gunner, Classy United win again, but Solskjaer's real test begins now. We have the Sun Sport here, and the Sun, they have Game of Drones, which are really interesting. You'd think the English especially would be sick of looking at drones when you think of what they went through in Gatwick before Christmas, but apparently Pep Guardiola is asking staff to train as pilots in film training, because apparently it's easier to talk about formations and plans when you see it from an aerial view, and if you're not using it for domestic or fun purposes, you have to get a licence, and that costs roughly around £1,000, which of course is going to cost Man City a fortune. And we have the Sunday World here, and Love on the Rocks. And that's Lovren. He's becoming the new Carrius in Liverpool, being blamed for all their ills and wrongs, and apparently he can cost them the title. So already it seems like Liverpudlians are finding their scapegoat if the worst of the worst happens. So loads going on. We were talking earlier, Cliona and Sarah, about there's a huge variety in the papers today, and one of the stories that really caught everyone's eye, and Sarah, you mentioned there earlier, was Saul Campbell. He's in the Mail on Sunday today being interviewed talking about Macclesfield.
Yeah, super interview, I think, with kind of Saul, with Oliver Holt again, I think probably giving a perspective, I think, and that's what can be so great about some of these features, when you kind of see an angle to a story that you mightn't have realised before. And Saul apparently, after many attempts, and despite, I think, spending the best part of 7 years going through getting his various qualifications through the UEFA ranks, had really struggled to land a managerial post before now, and so he's taken up the reins at Macclesfield Town. Yeah, and I think he kind of makes 2 points which are definitely thought-provoking. One is around, he kind of felt that if he hadn't been a man of colour, he would have captained England for the best part of 10 years. And secondly, actually, that there's only 8, I think, managers out of the whole 92 in the league. So it's not certainly something I might have thought about before, but certainly something I'd keep an eye out now, having read this piece.
Yeah, and Campbell has always been very forthright on the issue of race in football, and on trying to become, to either be English manager or to be a club man, or to be English captain or club manager, and he's never held back on it. And it's one of the things probably that a lot of people have said. He's always been they use the phrase a controversial figure, or a divisive figure, because he's never been afraid to say what he thinks. So I think this is a really good piece as well, Sarah, and particularly because of the Raheem Sterling stuff that's been there recently. So that is raised in it as well, and his appointment brought the number of BAME managers in the league to 8 at a 92 club. Like, when you look at it in those stark figures, it is interesting. And Macclesfield obviously is not glamorous, and he talks about, and even though I think he was seen at times as being a flash figure, that stereotypical footballer, but he talks and says, look, at my upbringing is very working class, and what comes across in the interview with Ali Holt is that he's really enjoying working at the level of Macclesfield.
Yeah, like, I think here he goes, like, I've had to kind of climb the mountain before and did it, and what's great about starting here too is that I know that I can do it. That I know I can do it because I've done it before. And he kind of talks here about, he's setting up the goals for training. He's out there, like, he's
getting his hands dirty, basically. He's not in there, because the thing about Sol Campbell is we always had this image of a man who was too big for his boots, nearly, that very notional about himself, big head, but this article shows actually no, he's willing to do the graft, and he's done the graft to get to this position even.
Yeah. The headline is really, I suppose, nearly tells you a lot about why this is worth reading. I'm like an iceberg, you don't know half the stuff below the surface. And after years of being sneered at as a dilettante, Sol Campbell's new job is revealing his true character. And he says, you get the sense that he really is passionate about this. He says, I may look cool and calm, but underneath I'm boiling inside with passion and ideas. So, it would be really interesting to see. Obviously, I think they haven't had anything success yet, but it is interesting. And people are always interested in Sol Campbell for some reason. There just is something about him.
And even the writing, it's written so well. Like the opening paragraph, Sol Campbell is sitting in a Spartan first floor room at a youth club on the outskirts of Knutsford, which serves as Macclefield's town training ground. He's wearing a blue town tracksuit. His hands rest on a Formica tabletop. From the window, he sees a flat roof covered with gravel, and beyond it, a dirty green 3G football pitch. This is not much of a view. This is football's basement, and Campbell is already thriving in it. Like, the picture it paints, it just of, Northern England, dank, dour, January, wet, cold, dreary, misery, far, far away from the millions of Arsenal and England.
And isn't it emblematic of a lot of these teams that are in the FA Cup this weekend that we were talking about? If they don't have the hope and the chance to go and have a good crack off somebody, and even to go and play, even if it isn't a home game, to go and play in some stadium that they're never otherwise going to get a chance in, then isn't that what football should be about? So, that description of it really reflects, I think, so many of the clubs that are playing in the third round of the FA Cup.
That could be Rotherham, that could be Dover, that could be any club, Yeovil, any of them, the way that description's been there. And we have this, picture of, we see the Chelseas, we see the Man Cities, and even the ones in the lower parts of the Premier League. But this is English football here, really.
And also, Maire Treasa, do you know what? I think it's a really timely piece as well. Not only because it's FA Cup, but because this is a really hard month for footballers, because it's the transfer season.
Yeah.
This is the month where, we always think of the ones who are doing well, but we know from the Irish lads going across the water how hard it is to make it now, how hard it is now this month for some of them, worrying about, are they going to get sent off on loan, are they going to get moved, what's going to happen. So it is a really, everything about it speaks of this time of year, I think, in football. You have that amazing match that we had during the week, the brilliant, fireworks of the top teams playing against each other, and such brilliant quality, and yet it exists beside this and wouldn't exist without this.
Yeah. No, it's 100%. Like, when you think of the kind of 92 clubs, and we focus, like, 95% of the conversation must be about those guys, the 22 or 24 is it in the Premier League, and and it is ultimately people's lives kind of down below, and still their dreams. And there's been some great kind of documentaries, I think, recently. Like, there's been the one done on Man City, but then more recently Netflix have just put one out on Sunderland, which even again the contrast between the two is interesting, and then that's only going to become more pronounced.
And I think, Sarah, that's what makes the other stuff good, is to understand what's going on with those legs, flying under the water, the difficulty of life in the lower leagues, and how great it is that you become a player. You know, even look at somebody like James Vardy, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that whole Leicester story, like, that story wouldn't have been as great except for where they came from and that whole history of players like him. And there'll be loads of those out there this weekend battling for their lives.
In fact, there's a nice piece in, I think it must be the Indo with Nigel Pearson.
Very interesting piece.
About he's gone over to coaching Louvain, I think, in Belgium now. But
that's right.
He's actually talking about Jamie Vardy and when he had him in and he didn't start so well despite being a big signing for the club, and kind of, I'm still going to play you no matter how you play, so, you know, sort it out.
That's a Jonathan Norcroft piece in the Sunday Times and it's actually a really interesting piece with Pearson, because Pearson, remember, was he sort of left the club in some controversy because his son was involved in a controversy over filmed sex acts and things. So while they were on a tour, so he left Leicester obviously in very controversial circumstances. Yet he talks with such passion about Leicester, and also he's the guy who bought a load of them. Like, he bought Mahrez for 350,000 and he was sold for 60 million. He's the guy who was involved with those. So it is you're right, that's a really good piece actually in relation to this as well. It's well worth a read.
It's interesting too, like when we mentioned Sunderland there, and Sunderland Till I Die, like I watched that over Christmas as well, and I knew it, but I obviously didn't really know it until I watched it. Like, a town like Sunderland, football is everything, and it gives you your light and it gives you your relief to go somewhere, and it affects the town when you're doing well, it affects the town when you're doing badly, it reflects your self-confidence in yourself, your image of yourself. And I just kind of realised that the lower league teams especially, and I know Sunderland are unusual because they were up there for a while and then began that disastrous fall down. But the lower leagues especially, football and Macclesfield and all those clubs, the Sol Campbells mean the world to them.
The town's identity is invested in that club. I mean, I think it's very like GA sometimes when you look at those lower leagues. Like, the town is about that club. You know, that's who you follow, that's who you were born to follow. They're not this big multi-million identity which can afford to bring in players from all over the world. You know, that's where you see it, I think. And you're right, absolutely. That Sunderland documentary definitely gets that across.
Yeah, there was one scene I thought was kind of interesting, was where the CEO and John O'Shea featured in, and had obviously taken in some of the local sponsors and was kind of trying to explain that the owner didn't want to invest much more in the wage bill. And one of the guys was like, but you've got to understand that we can't change club, or you know, this is our club. So that's fine in one way for the owner to decide that, but like, just to your point, Maire Treasa, just the fate of the football club affects our well-being every day. So I mean, I think it portrays that dichotomy between kind of, I suppose, sport and football, particularly as a business, which more than most sports it is, and then it's still ultimately actually it's what, you know, people really care about. It's a passion at the same time, and how that gets managed.
And we're actually talking about sport being business, no bigger business than the NFL. And we were discussing there earlier, it's in the Sunday Independent today, Neil Francis's article. We were talking about this earlier. He's got a big piece. I'm just turning the pages here. I got a tweet earlier today from somebody saying he hoped I rustled the pages as loudly as Joe Malloy did. So I hope this is loud enough now. A good
we
rustle.
Have to rustle. You can't break an, you can't build an egg, make an egg without rustling or breaking.
Well, certainly with the Sunday Independent
papers, we have to
size
rustle.
of it. It's the size of a small house. Page 8 and 9. Neil Francis' article. He's talking about the NFL, and being a talented athlete in America comes with many temptations which not everyone can resist. Cliona, you had strong feelings about this article.
Yeah, sometimes I really like what Neil Francis writes, and sometimes I think I really like that he takes a different angle on things. And this is a postcard from the USA, and he's been in it looks like he was in America in September and at an NFL game, and perhaps is out there still at the moment. I wasn't quite sure on that, but so the headline is "Lives on the Line when Players Choose to Walk on the Wild Side." Being a talented athlete in America comes with many temptations which not everyone can resist. So he talks about some of the high-profile young NFL players who have got in trouble recently and who have really essentially, you know, killed their careers. And that is all interesting. He talks about Kareem Hunt, you know, the Chiefs, the guy who was the rising star, and has lost his. He's sacked about. There was an incident in a hotel with a woman where he struck a woman, and he wasn't sacked at the time, but then TMZ, one of the the tabloid online companies in America got the video, security video of what happened in the thing, and then he was sacked. So he talks about him, and then he goes into detail about this
Isn't
guy's
it interesting
background.
though that TMZ had to get their hands on the video before the NFL did anything?
Yeah,
I mean,
and that
I
was a
heard
big
people
source of
say
debate.
It's
on
not
that.
so bad. It's not as bad as Ray Rice.
Yeah.
You're thinking, like, jeepers, it's just the way we're going now.
And until people saw the video too, there was all kinds of, he was being hassled by the woman, and then the video came out, and lots of people were like, well, that's pretty aggressive, pretty violent stuff. But he in talking about Hunt, he actually goes into Hunt's background, and Hunt's background is, so difficult.
Yeah.
His family was rife with crime and drug-related crime. His uncle was convicted of voluntary manslaughter, still serving a 23-year term in jail. Another one was doing a 10-year stretch for drug trafficking. He's a cousin serving time for drugs and gun. His brother was in jail. His mother was arrested for cocaine possession and continuous DUI, drinking under the influence.
And his dad has been arrested 35 times with 9 years in prison, I think.
For domestic violence and drug-related felonies.
And when you think about that, and
what chance did Kareem have? You nearly
what chance does a player have with such a tough background to make it? Sport is their way out. Sport is such a valuable commodity and such a way to go. But obviously Hunt got in trouble. What I take issue with, I suppose, is some of the throwaway lines in this, and one of them is that he's talking later then in the same article about a guy called Josh Gordon who plays with Cleveland Browns, and he went to Belichick. He ended up, I think, does he end up with the Chiefs or the Patriots? And he's saying, he had a brilliant manager there in Belichick, a guy who would make sure that, anybody who had problems in their personal life, they'd be sorted out. But obviously, Gordon has had terrible drug problems, has a history of drug problems, and now his career is over at a very young age. But I take issue with lines in it, like, unfortunately, when you're dealing with a junkie, there's no basis for a working arrangement. This is what Francis writes: junkies who happen to be talented athletes are the most worthless investment in a human being and the most pointless. I mean, I just think that's a very savage thing to say. It's such a dystopian view of people. I don't like the word junkie anyway. We don't use anything as pejorative about people who have other addictions as the word junkie. It is loaded with meaning.
We don't call an athlete who's an alcoholic a junkie, for an argument's sake, or a gambling issue perhaps. They're not called a junkie, and it's all addictions. Yeah.
So I take issue with that, because I think that it takes from what is otherwise a very thought-provoking and interesting article. And in another case, talking again, I think, about Gordon later on, and the fact that he's lost his career, a brilliant career, because of drug abuse, and he's out of the game now. Francis correctly says, what part of last chance does he not understand? Because when he came out of the game, he said, he had mental issues to deal with, and Neil Francis is arguing, look, you have to deal with addiction. You can't be blaming mental issues on that. You have to deal with that. But then he says, career over, sonny, rehab for you, and maybe jail when you can't pay the child support. And again, I think that is a stereotype that is just, I just think that's an unacceptable stereotype. So, there's parts of this that I think are really interesting, and people will be really interested in it, but there's other parts of it that I think are I think suitable.
Even that, at a whim, he's able to kind of identify kind of 4 of these stories in this article, and no doubt, there's plenty more of where these came from in American football. And even at one point he said, talking about Gordon there's no doubting his athletic ability, just his ability to stay clean for 17 weeks a season. And I actually always find it quite interesting that in a way the American football season is so short.
And their careers are so short.
And their careers are so short, given the kind of volumes of money involved. But I don't know, I think the fact that this seems to be like a running thread through American football in particular, like, is there not an onus on the people involved in the sport who come from very different backgrounds from the ones that are depicted here and do particularly well out of that game to kind of to do more to help
Well,
these
this is
guys,
it. When the
you
likes,
know?
and in fairness, Neil Francis does lay out the work Bill Belichick did to try and keep him clean.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think that's just scratching the surface. It's looking at the symptoms. It's not looking at the cause, perhaps. Like there was another piece. Everything looked good. You can't, though, reason with the junkie. And when New England had their bye round on November 20th, Gordon, despite his life and his career on the line, spent Saturday trying to ditch his chaperones. After an exhausting day, he managed to do it, contacted his local drug dealer and got bombed. There's no point in trying to reconcile his behaviour with what he had to lose. The next day he issued a statement via his lawyers. I take my mental health very seriously. At this point, to ensure I remain able to perform at the highest level, I've recently felt like I could get a better grasp on things mentally. And it just strikes me that, what about looking at how this man had gotten so addicted to substances that despite on weekly blood tests, weekly urine samples, being chaperoned 24/7 nearly, that he still went to those lengths.
Yeah. And he I mean, as I said, there's a lot in this that is good. There's just a couple of throwaway things in it that I don't think that are correct to say. And he also looks at Julian Edelman, the two-time Super Bowl receiver for the Patriots, and he talks about him getting done for drugs, for performance-enhancing drugs. And so he's taken a few examples and he's looking at them, and basically he's saying, you know, how easy it is to go off the rails, if you like, and why people can't survive in this. But he talks then about the level of drug abuse in America, and not just in performance-enhancing drugs, or not just amongst athletes, but actually amongst, we know this is the case, where social drugs in America and prescription drugs are being abused by, very young children across a whole range in the society. So it's interesting on that. He talks about this, and then actually in the conclusion he talks about, in America, over 1 million people regularly take anabolic steroids. It's a 13.8 billion industry, and close to 10,000 people die from side effects of misuse of these drugs every year. And he's saying Sport Ireland needs to be even more aggressive in Ireland about intervention in possible drug abuse. But the fact is that in Ireland, in 2017, if I remember correctly, in 2017, in the seizure of illegal anabolic steroids in the country, they found over 450,000 units of illegal steroids came into Ireland last year. Now, only one athlete in Ireland that year failed a drugs test. Most of those steroids are going into gyms. They're going into social sport, or bodybuilding, or the fitness industry. And Sport Ireland doesn't actually police that. They don't.
They don't have any remit on that.
They've no remit on that area at all. So that's, I think that's an interesting thing to point out, because the level that amount of steroids that went up by 300% from the previous year. That is shocking, the amount of steroids that are washing into the Irish sport industry, if you like, not competitive sport necessarily. And we don't really talk about that enough either, I don't think.
Well, on that, I think in the couple of the papers picked up about the 90-year-old master cyclist, I don't know if you saw
in America,
in the US, who I think has had to forego his title has been stripped from him because he returned a positive drugs test, and
what 90-year-old isn't on drugs is what I'm asking. If you're alive at 90,
he's had a fair few issues. He must have had issues.
But I think to your point, you're absolutely right. Like, the use of steroids does seem to be kind of slipping more into kind of recreational sport, even, or fitness maybe, as the two are obviously related, but
and in the same way that social drug use is slipping into youth culture in America, and he points that out, the use of soft drugs and cocaine in America and the rise in that. So they're all linked, and there is clearly in America, we know the levels of education, the levels of poverty are higher in the African American communities. So, these people are at a disadvantage. It is legitimate to say, why can't you change that? How do you change that? Why do people like this with such talent? How can you not protect them and bring them through the system?
Yeah, I feel there's too much blame being put on the individual who has fallen down due to these constraints and issues and disadvantages in taking drugs. We all know taking drugs is bad. It's illegal. You shouldn't be doing it. But I do think that perhaps this article doesn't look at the bigger issue as who is the bigger person who should be looking out for this. Is it the NFL? Is it American government policy? Is it federal policy? Yeah. And then, of course, it's very easy for us to talk about over there in America without looking on our doorstep.
Yeah.
And this is where the steroids come in especially. Cliona's just given out the stats there, but I thought Neil Francis' article at the end was very good when he explains, how, people are taking insulin now. I didn't realise that was becoming such a big thing.
Either. Oh my
and it makes
goodness.
complete sense. Insulin has a half-life of 4 minutes, which basically means if I inject insulin 5 minutes ago and somebody comes to test me, you won't find it in my system.
And he also says bodybuilders are injecting paraffin.
Yeah.
Paraffin oil into their limbs. I've never heard that either before. So like, yeah, look, it's a very interesting read. There's some stuff I absolutely disagree with him on it, but I think that's the job of a good columnist, is to make you think, sometimes. But there are definitely some things that I absolutely don't agree with him on in it. And I think, it is easy sometimes to throw this accusations at somebody way across the water, and when sometimes we need to be looking at our own doorstep.
So when we are looking at our doorstep and when athletes are being tested, if they are failing a drugs test, are we blaming the athlete? Are we blaming the system?
Well, there's a couple of things there.
Yeah.
First of all, the NFL, baseball, American football, they are professional companies and they run their own drug testing regimes. So they're completely different. So that would be like, how could you even put it in this country, Sarah? But it would be like,
why don't you have?
You wouldn't. That would be like Irish rugby running its own anti-doping and testing
kind of
its own players. Self-policing it.
Yeah.
They're self-policed. So I'm not sure what the level of education is in those professional leagues in America.
Yeah, no. Well, I suppose
we know baseball for years didn't test, didn't seem to educate. Was full of.
I also don't think they adhere to the same. Like, they don't sign up to WADA.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Or,
that's what I'm saying. They're totally separate.
It's totally separate, and I think sometimes even slightly different standards. So I think even in American football, they're probably coming from a place where some level of drug use or chemical assistance was tolerated or even part of the system.
Definitely in baseball for years.
It wasn't illegal in the context of the sport, or it wasn't banned. So they probably are coming from a different place in terms of trying to educate people as to what is permissible or what isn't permissible, or changing culture, whereas we probably haven't had that in this country to the same extent across the sports.
Plus we have Sport Ireland, which their role is not only to test and make sure there aren't drugs, their role is also to educate. In GA, obviously, there's an argument to say they're not being educated well enough, and who's responsible for them not being educated well enough, if you like. But that's their remit. Their remit is to educate, test, ensure we have a clean system.
And the GA would say they're doing their bit, they're going to every club, they're sending out all the information, but that's one thing, but who's educating people in the gyms?
Yeah, well, that's the thing.
Or the person who's doing their own at-home regime, and you can order stuff online.
Yeah, and that's the problem now. Online has made it a wild west where you can order anything you want online, and that's the really scary stuff. And that's why I think we should talk about drugs in all contexts in sport. Whether it's social, and there's an argument to say, you could make an argument to say you shouldn't be testing for social drugs if they're not performance enhancing. What's the problem? There's a huge debate around this, I think.
I think as well, when people just see the pretty physique, they don't realise maybe the damage being done internally. Like if you're taking any kind of drug, I mean, if you take Nurofen for too long, you can end up damaging your liver. And I think there's a real lack of foresight and long-term thinking when you start thinking get the body beautiful now, that kind of way. And that's probably our own faults for not getting that message out there.
Oh, absolutely. Well, there's so much out there even at the moment. I think you even did a piece, did you, about not getting caught up too much on the January fads. I mean, you're presented all the time with these images of these perfect human beings, but it's a bit like the iceberg comment. You don't never see what goes on underneath it. And, it is. I actually think the Wild West is a super description on it, because the internet has just kind of opened up everything. You can try to self-diagnose yourself with almost like with a medical ailment, often, wrongly, but because there is so much information out there, and then you have access to so much, product or substances or whatever you want through the internet as well. Never mind the dark net if you knew how to get on that. But, so it is, I think, kind of education and the importance of kind of running those decisions by people who are actually qualified professionals and stuff is also a really important point.
Speaking of perfect individuals, we do have to take a quick break, but we'll be back, and we'll be back talking about the most perfect individual to ever come into the studio, Paul Kimmage.
Join that conversation. Text us on 53106. Texts cost 30 cents.
New year, new laptop. The Curry's PC World sale is now on, with the largest range of home appliances and technology. Get our lowest ever price on the HP 7th Gen Intel Core i5 laptop at just $479.
Save up to €400 on Windows laptops, up to 30% on tablets, and 10% on selected gaming laptops. Nobody beats our prices fact. So sorry other stores, these are the ones you're gonna have to match. Good luck. At Curry's PC World, we help you get it right.
Circle K Kill North, located northbound on the N7, is now open. Visit us today to fuel up with our superior quality fuel miles and delicious Simply Great coffee, and fill up on our tasty new food menu, including our Mexican food range Cantina. Circle K Kill North, your new destination for convenience and fuel, located northbound on the N7.
The gym. But where do I start? Rowing machine? Treadmill? Weights? When it comes to looking after your body, it can be hard to know where to start. But if you're one of the 60% of Irish women between 18 and 50 who aren't getting enough iron in their diet, then start with Avonmore Slimline Milk. That's because Avonmore Slimline Milk is enriched with iron and vitamin C to help reduce tiredness and fatigue. Start strong with Avonmore Slimline Milk, based on IUNA data, a nationally representative dietary survey.
With Virgin Media, you can build up the entertainment and tear down the price. Switch to Virgin Media today and get superfast broadband and TV for just €49 a month for an awesome 12 months. The sale that stacks up. Now on. See virginmedia.ie and check out how our mobile sales stacks up too.
T's and C's apply. See virginmedia.ie. 12-month contract. Offer ends 27th of February 2019.
Dad, can we get the red one? No, I like the one with the shiny wheels.
Hang on, I want that one.
No, we're getting the one with 16-inch alloys and park assist.
With Volkswagen Financial Services personal contract plans, your choices are endless. And when you found your dream 191 car, drive away with peace of mind knowing we guarantee the minimum future value. To learn more about our PCP, contact your local authorised Volkswagen, Audi, Seat, Skoda or Volkswagen commercial vehicle retailer, or visit vwfs.ie/PCP. PCP is offered by Volkswagen Bank GmbH Branch Ireland, authorised by the Federal Financial Supervisory Authority in Germany and regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland for conduct of business rules. Terms and conditions apply.
This isn't gonna be easy.
Why are you talking in a voice?
Late nights, intensive research, forget about seeing your family.
Well, you're my wife.
We'll chase every lead, shake down every witness.
Wait, what?
Cross-reference every offer and triangulate every promotion until we find it.
Find what?
The way, Peter. The way to save on car insurance.
But I already went on to 123.ie. Save 10%, no questions asked.
Oh, I better cancel those sniffer dogs.
Simple is smarter. Get 10% off new car insurance when you buy online at 123.ie. Acceptance criteria, T's and C's apply. 123 Money Limited trading as 123.ie is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland. RSA Insurance Ireland Act provides 123.ie car insurance.
The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
Yeah, we're back here. Hope you're enjoying the paper review. We're in the company of Cliona Foley from our Off the Bench podcast and I'm losing my words, WH's head of sport, Sarah O'Connor. We were just discussing there Neil Francis's article, and just above it is Paul Kimmage's article, Cliona, where he's criticising Ronan O'Gara for saying he's not going hard enough in questioning his sport.
Yeah, and on the front page of the Sunday Indo, it said, you see Paul Kimmage, parents are wondering if rugby is right for their kids. And I thought, oh, brilliant, Paul is going to go look in depth at, the levels of danger in rugby, which obviously is a huge theme in rugby at the moment, and is a theme, in fairness, that he, through talking about what's happened in France and in the last few years, has really been banging a drum about. But actually what this turns out to be is him having a go at Ronan O'Gara. I'd say challenging. I think the young kids nowadays say calling out, isn't that the phrase? Yeah. He's kind of calling out Rod here, saying that he's given out because Ronan O'Gara, who does a really good column in the Examiner weekly, his recent column, he talked about a few things, but Kimmage is saying he's accusing him really of not being honest enough. In that piece, so I remember noticing it, and O'Driscoll covered a lot of things. He talked about the Brian O'Driscoll revelations about the over-medication in rugby that really, happened on this programme. And he talked about that a bit, and that interested me. That's why I went to read it. But one of the things he said, and it was close to the end of the article, I remember, he said, was about his son. He said, my eldest son, Aru, is 10 now. His first love is soccer, and whether I want him to be a rugby player in the future is something I think about a lot. There's a huge responsibility with the educators and the coaches to shape the game and create a vision for future generations. Rugby is changing so dramatically, but if the future of the game is a pack of behemoths stalking the field and boshing their way to superiority, then I don't know if there's going to be a place for Rua. And I remember thinking that was a great, really a good phrase. It was a boshing their way to superiority, caught my eye and thought, God, that's a pretty good, strong way to say it. But as it's Paul, who doesn't suffer anybody not calling things absolutely black and triple times black, he says this was wishy-washy pap from Rog. He says, and he quotes then people like David Walsh, Mark Reason, Robert Kitson in The Guardian and Rory O'Connor in The Independent, who have all in recent weeks talked about the dangers inherent in rugby, about people getting bigger and stronger, and the eye gouging or even the hard tackling, concussion rates. So Kimmage's big message here is there's not enough about that area of it from the players themselves. For O'Gara and many others, rugby is still a living, and some truths won't help pay the bills, but the game is in serious trouble and it won't be saved without them. Do they truly love rugby? Is the game worth fighting for? Do they want the kids to play? Tell us what you really think. And I mean, that is always Kimmage's line, and that's why we love to hear what he says and what he writes sometimes, because tell us what you really think is an ongoing theme with them. And I suppose he's challenging Rog and saying, we really want to know more about this.
But maybe this is what Rog really thinks.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the thing. Sometimes, what I like about Paul Kimmage's writing is that he won't leave a tooth in it. He will say what he thinks and he will go to the heart of it. And sometimes what he writes is not nice to read if you're that person that he's targeting, or for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But generally, he's not inaccurate. But at the same time, maybe this is just Paul Kimmage saying that Ronan O'Gara should be thinking this.
Should be saying this.
Maybe Ronan O'Gara doesn't think this here.
Yeah, no, and like when you read kind of that quote that Kimmage says is wishy-washy from O'Gara, in a way, there is a huge dichotomy out there at the moment between, say, rugby as a professional sport, and then even kind of, again, going back to our kind of League Twos, but the rugby that exists at a completely, a different level. Yeah. Underage, even junior rugby, where you at one level you're dealing with professional athletes who are trained. They're absolute athletes. They're getting bigger. They're getting faster. They're getting stronger, and they're actually being paid to train, so they become bigger, faster, and stronger. And yet, that is one route. And then at another level, you do have, and the clubs would say they're struggling a little bit compared to what they did in the past, but you still have teams lining out all around the country for competitions like the Towns Cup or even AIL, where you go down the divisions and you've kind of got athletes of I suppose more recreational, certainly not professional, and maybe at one level it does seem that people are becoming to kind of trying to bosh their way to superiority.
And when I read that, Sarah, I did think, God, that's quite a strong thing for somebody of Ronan O'Gara's status to say, I'm not sure would my kid play. But Kimmage feels he isn't going hard enough at it. And the headline is a bit confusing, I think, as parents are wondering if rugby is the right sport for their kids. Well, actually, that's Paul Kimmage saying that. Do you know what I mean? And your kids, you have young children, and would you let them play rugby?
I've got a 6 and a 5-year-old, both of whom are down playing rugby, and an 8-year-old who gets dragged to the hockey pitch, but when she's not dragged to the hockey pitch, goes to play in the rugby training. And for them, it's interesting, because I remember actually Neil Francis once speaking at an event, and he said, you know what, we have to recognise in Ireland actually sometimes that we're so lucky that we can able to go down to the sports grounds or to Thomond or to the RDS and actually see world-class athletes playing. And he's like, don't take it for granted, it may not always last forever. And at the time he was talking in the context of Brian O'Driscoll. But these are the guys that came home from work one night to look at my 6-year-old to change the profile on his Netflix thing, which is another debate altogether, to James Johnny Sexton Ferris, which I had to smile at. But the amount of 6-year-old boys that think, and girls who think Johnny Sexton is a god. It's an absolute god.
My nephew as well, he's 9, he loves Johnny Sexton. You ask him, who's your favourite player? Johnny Sexton straight away.
Yeah. And you see, I think I know where Kimmage is coming from. We all watch rugby these days. We see the hits. We feel guilty about even watching sometimes, because the ferocity of it, the speed, the power, the ratio, the size of the bodies that are hitting and people getting injured. That's a valid argument, definitely.
Yeah.
But does that mean that rugby is dead? No, because rugby can be played from every level. The level from your children are playing on a social level, people even go out to play at weekends, even if it's tag rugby, whatever it is. So I think you can't say a sport is in danger because the professional level of it has become really, really dangerous. You could say that about tons of sports. Horse racing is the same. What you have to hope is that the people who run it make the professional end of it safer, whether it is by cleaning up the drug thing in it or changing the rules in rugby in this case and how they tackle whatever. So there's all levels of sport, and I think sometimes I don't have children, so I'm not sure, Sarah, and I'm not sure, Maire Treasa, what you feel, but I don't think it would stop me letting my kids play rugby if I had kids. But there are levels. When you get to a certain level, then it becomes down to players. What are they willing to do themselves, and what is their governing body doing to keep them safe? And I think that applies across a lot of sports.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you also touched there, if it is a skill-based decision-making game, then I'd have every interest in being a rugby player. And actually, that probably goes back to sport. And really, it's actually, when you look back, it's probably the other things. I mean, some people get to make a career out of sport, but it's still, of playing sport, it's still a minority. For the most of the rest of them, and like I imagine my kids are going to fall into that group, it will be the friends that they make, or the discipline, or the teamwork, or the commitment. And that could come from rugby, it could come from GAA, it could come from soccer, it could come from tennis or whatever. I mean, I think as a parent, you've just got to try to support them in the things. Well, I think first you have to kind of bring them to a few things and give them a range of, or some level of sporting opportunity, and then see kind of where the cards fall. But again, I see where kind of Kimmage is coming from, but to your point, Cliona, I think that's right. There are so many levels at which you can play sport. And obviously there have been 3 deaths in France, and a 19-year-old recently dying in a really tragic way. It was a tackle. I think he had a broken neck and had a cardiac arrest. And he's saying, why aren't the players or the ex-players or the pundits, why aren't they talking about this? And that's a valid thing to say. But I don't think you can be too sweeping in the generalisation. He also questions,
he brings back again, obviously, the Grobbler story from Munster. Yeah. And he was saying, confessed steroid abuser has been playing for the province. How had it happened? Who had signed off on it? Has anybody told Joe Schmidt or Philip Brown? What had happened to the I Refuse Zero Tolerance on doping? What message did it send to the Munster Academy? All very pertinent questions. And he says, questions O'Gara did not address.
Are they questions for O'Gara, though, or are they questions for Munster?
This is what I'm wondering. And as well as that, following our previous discussion about, chronic drug abusers and people falling foul of systems, that if we've all heard about what's been going on in South Africa, should we be blaming Grobbler for this? Yeah. He confessed, he did his time. But I don't know.
Yeah, maybe there's
is there space for redemption?
Exactly. And that is a big question. And I suppose it's funny. We'll talk about it later. But like Eric Cantona, I've still never forgiven him for that kung fu kick. And yet, lots of people think that's it should be well forgotten about. I think we're all different in our levels of judgmentalism.
Yeah, and I think maybe it does, to be fair, or maybe take some people, and like Kimmage himself is probably be rewarded for this, but to come out and speak about the system and how they made decisions.
He did that, Sarah.
Yeah, because
he paid a heavy price for it, personally, professionally.
Absolutely. Yeah. But sometimes it probably does take people to come out and explain how they ended up in that scenario, in order for these kind of conversations to take place, and maybe for it to be different for people in the future. And, I think the Grobbler incident, certainly, not saying all the questions have been answered, but it certainly has posed or created questions that ultimately down the line, hopefully, the Irish rugby system will be better for it.
Well, you're a parent. Would you have issues, for example, if somebody like Grobbler came in speaking to kids in your school, for example, about rugby?
I guess it would depend on the context. If he was to come in and explain that, maybe tell his story from how he ended up making decisions that he shouldn't have made, and say, I'm so lucky actually that I'm still being allowed to play because it could have gone completely the other way. Well, then maybe, because I think sometimes it is helpful for people, or even for even myself, to kind of, I remember once actually getting a tour of Mountjoy Prison from the then warden, or John Lonergan, and he was like, listen, don't ever think that any of you, or we're a group of law students, are not almost a subconscious decision away from ending up here. Do you know, any of us who ever picked up a mobile phone in a car or sent a text, and do you know, it's a very fine line sometimes between making a decision that has implications that you would never think.
And that's if you have two parents to guide you. But if you're from an area with social deprivation, there might be no father in the home or no mother sometimes. You can suddenly see how these incidents can perpetuate.
Or sport.
It's very, very hard to be perfect. And I think that's the trouble with athletes. We do expect them to be perfect.
We do, and as journalists, definitely we're very judgmental. And I know, as I said, I know I'm guilty of that. Sometimes I really do judge people because I feel so strongly about clean sport and about making sport as fair as possible for everybody who's involved at every level. But it is hard. Sometimes I know I'm too over judgmental. The interesting thing for me, though, is that on the drug issue, on the doping issue, I have rarely, and I covered sport for a long time, and particularly athletics, I've rarely seen somebody who was caught for doping doing anti-doping work in the communities or with children afterwards. I haven't seen that retribution, that giving back, that sort of thing. And like the anti-doping, even in Ireland, the anti-doping, you can actually get your sentence or your punishment lessened if you fess up and if you get involved in educational things. And I have seen very little of that.
I wonder though, is that because we kind of cast them out completely?
Is that because we make pariahs of them?
I wonder.
I'd have to put my hand up there.
I don't know the answer to that.
I think it's probably... I think there's some truth in that, Sarah.
If there's one thing I've learned as I've gotten older is that life is not black and white.
Yeah.
And I think this is the thing with this article. Again, I do enjoy Paul Kimmage's writing. I always seek his articles out. I don't always agree with them, but a lot of the time I do. And I think that's the issue. I think he's seeing Ronan O'Gara very black and white here. And I think Ronan is seeing life is a series of greys.
And Paul is one of those rare journalists. He is a crusading journalist. There aren't many of them around. That's what makes some of his work so good, I think. But when you're crusading, very often you see only the one colour. You don't see shades of grey. Because if you look at the shades of grey, they're mitigating circumstances. What do you allow? Do you take in all those other things? So I think that is interesting. I think it's a really good point you make.
But I mean, the legal system sees shades of grey. I mean, how often have we sat in courtrooms? In my previous life, I worked in news, and court reporting was a lot of what I did. And a judge would always take in mitigating factors. He would say, well, you confessed early, you've done this, you've done that. Yeah. So the legal system takes it in. So I'm just wondering, maybe as journalists, are we far too harsh on athletes? I think maybe sometimes we might be.
Yeah, and Sarah, you worked.
I know, I think law is massively kind of grey because you're in trying to achieve some level of justice. You end up trying to take in all sorts of factors, and even from all the individual parties that are involved in the particular circumstance. Like I actually remember our very first day of law, it was Professor William Binchy, who would be known for particularly forthright views, but he actually stood up and told us that the sign of a really good lawyer was somebody that could argue both sides of any argument, as well as each other. And I think that's all you need to know, really. That's you have to be able to be black, you have to be able to white and merge the two, which is the grey. Yeah. So
and sport even with the VAR controversies in recent months and even yesterday, sport sometimes isn't black and white, but a ruling has to be made to make it black and white, if you like, even though we'd all look and say, well, I'm not too sure about that, if you like. I think with doping, I feel really strongly about it not being black and white, because I feel strongly that there can't be grey areas, because if you do, it gets so convoluted, and if you allow, in some circumstances, and this and that and the other, there's some of that now because suspensions can be lessened, but I still think it has to be down to personal responsibility.
Speaking of arguments, one of the biggest arguments we'll remember from last year was when Naomi Osaka was playing Serena Williams. Moving on from that, Cliona, you found an article that you found really interesting about Naomi Osaka.
Yeah, speaking of black and white, I was on the non-Serena side in that argument, very much on the non-Serena side in that. I was, I
was very pro-Serena.
Were you? Oh, I was absolutely not. I felt she was the person with power, with influence. I felt she was hectoring and bullying. I felt she used her power, and I didn't accept her side of it at all. I felt it completely overshadowed Naomi Osaka's success in winning the US Open.
I think it's interesting in the picture there.
It's really interesting because
here she does not look happy when you think about it.
She was crying at the presentation, and this is a piece in the Sunday Times by Barry Flatman, the tennis correspondent, and it is the headline is Poison Chalice, and she's actually posing with a snake. But it's about Naomi Osaka. Thankfully, it is about her, not about Serena Williams this time. It's about her, and obviously the Australian Open is about to start, and they're looking. Am I right in thinking that's Australian Open?
Yeah.
They're looking at about her and where she is now, because she's just about to move into 4th in the world rankings, and she has made an extraordinary jump. She was 72nd last year.
Yeah.
And also they're talking about the amount of women, the different number of women that have won majors this year, and about the state of women's tennis, if you like. So all of that, I think, is brilliant. It's brilliant to see the Sunday Times featuring a female athlete like this and looking at her. But I have issues with some of the ways it's written. Because
are you calling out?
Yeah. I'm calling out very flat man here. Because it starts off talking about her progress, and you know, her, obviously that's great success at the US Open, and she's talking about her goals for the Australian Open, and then out of nowhere the next paragraph is Osaka enjoys nice clothes and the ability to spend whenever the impulse propels her towards the shopping malls of her hometown of Boca Raton,
I actually thought
Florida.
that was a very glib sentence just chucked in.
What is it doing in there? And then you have a whole load of paragraphs about her it's like all of her endorsements, all the money she makes is talked about. But what I really wanted to know is, how do you go from 72nd in the world to 4th? And he really doesn't address it until almost the last paragraph.
Yeah.
And I would have liked to know a lot more about that. I'd also love to know, why is she playing for Japan when she moved to America when she was 3, if I remember correctly, and has been born and reared in America, not born there, but, you know, could have declared for America. I'd love to know all that stuff. And the most interesting paragraph, I think, is probably thrown away at the end.
Yeah.
And she says, sometimes, say a year ago, I was making a lot of mistakes, but since then I've been working with my coach, Sasha Bajing, who is a former employee of Williams and Carla Wozniacki.
Yeah.
Now that's what I want to know about, and that's what female athletes should be asked about. You know, where'd you get your skills from? How did you make that jump? Who are you working with? What have you changed in your technique? All of that. So I was a little disappointed. Delighted, first of all, to see an article about Naomi Osaka, because I felt she was so hard done by and overlooked at that US Open. But I don't think this is a great example of it.
Yeah, because I think professional female tennis is actually, or professional tennis is fascinating. I mean, it's like, I almost think more than anything, it's like our modern day gladiators, you know, like when you see the two individuals out there on court in front of a big crowd kind of battling it out. And it's a bit like, I think, when you see professional golfers on the range, they can absolutely all hit the ball. It's just, you know, it's such a mental battle alongside the kind of...
Yeah, but they have to do it on complete... And nobody can say a word to them when they're playing. Do you know what I mean? Tennis is very gladiatorial. You're right, it is. And what did you think? Am I reading this wrong, Sarah? Or
no, just this article. I don't know why. Like, I was interested to know more about Osaka, because, you know, I know a little bit, I think, particularly after that kind of US Open final, about the move from, you know, declaring for Japan, but having been kind of brought up in the States. But, yeah, I kind of like to know a bit more. Now, this article, although kind of, you know, a feature piece, doesn't really, I think, outline, you know, as I said, even the piece about her shopping, it'd be interesting, you know, if that is a big thing that she likes to do, why is that? I mean, I think we all kind of know, like, Venus is into her fashion and has gone down. Fashion design is one of the things she does, which is quite interesting, you know, and...
Like, he does come into some of her technical stuff. So he says she could hit 100-mile-an-hour serves at the age of 16, and she's currently serving at 125 miles an hour. But, like, that's the stuff I want to know about an athlete, whether they're male or female. I want to know, you know, how do they get that good?
I want to know how she got into a final against Serena Williams to begin with, when I'd never heard of her until that day.
Yeah, exactly. And how did she make such progress so quickly?
And I have to say, I went to my first WTA Tour event last February, actually, and I you know, I've lucky enough to be at Wimbledon once or twice before that, but oh my goodness, that new generation of females coming through, they just hit the ball unbelievably hard. So
and you really hear it when you're at a live event.
Yeah, when you see it live. But you know, we were watching, I think, quarter-final stage. So you know, Kotna, who's obviously slid down the rankings quite a bit last year, that up-and-coming Russian player, Daria, I mean, unbelievable. The Wimbledon champion, Gabriella.
And I think there's a really interesting narrative about women's tennis, which is, why is Serena so good, and then why is a different person winning, you know, the Grand Slams? And you don't get that with men's. It's like, it's a criticism of the women's game that people are not consistent enough, and that's a fair argument. Why aren't they more consistent?
Well, I would always compare it to the Munster Hurling Championship. They're all so good. That it's just the good day out.
And how are each of them suddenly pouncing and making that progress? So I think there is an interesting debate even there about women's tennis and how the narrative that's spun about it, I think, is very interesting.
But we should text come in here actually speak about women's tennis there, saying loving the female presence on today's show. Happy Nullig Naman to you all. Hopefully see a bit more female presence on the show in future. That comes from Leah. And actually this article shows that it is happening, and it's probably happening a bit quicker in the last year or two, that women finally are getting a platform, that she's in the normal sports pages, and aside from the line or two about her shopping, and that's okay sometimes.
Okay. Yeah,
I shop, you shop, we all shop.
Yeah.
So do men, though. This is the thing. I mean, look at...
Yeah, that's what I thought. I didn't think that was going to be in that article about... I mean, I have seen stuff in Lewis Hamilton's obsession with fashion and all the rest, but they're usually feature articles,
dressed.
and they're usually feature articles in fashion magazines or something.
Look what Conor McGregor has spawned with his suits and stuff. I mean, there's very well-dressed young men in their 20s now.
And while we're just talking about that, just to say to the listeners as well, like it is Nullig Naman, and we should say, like, we have some really good young male and female tennis players, but Georgia Drummy, she's based in Florida at the Chris Evert, and she made, I think, the quarterfinals at the Australian Open this year. Was it in doubles? She certainly got to the very late stages in the US and the Australian Open. One of them as a doubles player with an American partner, and one on her own. She's definitely one to watch in future.
Let's move closer to home. I know we always think of Gaelic games and stuff being a summertime pursuit, but here we are in early January. The Christmas trees are still up, unless you're in Cliona Foley's house where there's no Christmas tree at all. But some people still have their trees up. But Gaelic games in full throttle, and there's loads in the papers this weekend as well.
The Mail is good today, really isn't it, Sarah?
Yeah.
And they do a very good job. I mean, first of all, rules, new rules, changing rules. They're all over the shop, and
they're very black and white as well, aren't they?
And you know what? We all really actually want to go out, and very few of us have probably actually seen them in action yet. So we are still curious about it. Dermot Crowe has a good piece, I think, a very good piece, I think, in the Sunday Independent.
Yeah.
Because Kevin Walsh came out during the week, the Galway football manager, giving out saying, the pundits are driving this change, and Mick Foley in the Sunday Times and Dermot Crowe and also people in the Mail as well say, sorry, it's not the pundits who are driving the change, it's the research that the GA themselves have done. So Dermot goes through the statistics that we've heard a lot about, the number of hand passing in games compared to 10 years ago, the little lesser amounts of kicking. So that's the recurring theme, isn't it, in today's paper?
Yeah, though I think Joe Brawley actually did in his own article also mention that some of the changes that didn't get through, he thought might have been because his name was associated with
which I thought was quite good. Yeah, I thought that was I thought his article actually was very well written, and he makes some pertinent points, but at the same time, the argument has also been made you can't allow pundits to make these rules, and I don't think they are, to be fair. I mean, David Hassan does a lot of work, and I don't think anybody can argue that David Hassan is not working off evidence. I'm not saying these rules were the answer either. I don't know. I mean, see, Wexford disallowed a goal last night for 4 hand passes in a row.
Yeah, I know. And like it is. The issues I'd have very often with the GA when they change rules is they give players very little time to learn them, and they give referees very little time to learn them. And I thought that, again, Dermot Crowe's piece is good because I think he quotes Joe, one of the referees, talking about that look, we just have to get on with it, but it's not easy for us either.
I was going to say, I feel sorry for the referees, do you know?
It's hard enough.
It's hard enough.
You'd be a referee. Yeah. I mean, I do sometimes question why anybody would consider this is a good idea, that I'm going to try and stand here and regulate between 30 fully grown individuals at the speed, especially if it's hurling.
And Joe McQuillan talks about it. He talks about just even in the early stages of the McKenna Cup, like that they are having to work really hard to get this right. But Dermot Crowe lays out all the facts and figures there. In the period since 2011, based on studies of 322 championship matches, the average number of hand passes per match has gone up by 100 per match. By 100. And then he goes into the other statistics, and people will have heard them before, but they are interesting. In the 2018 All-Ireland final, Dublin made 244 passes against Tyrone. Of those, just 54 were kick passes. Whenever there's change, there's always going to be rows. And this is obviously going to run and run and run. And there will be games today where there's going to be controversies. But, you know, if the GA weren't trying to change, wouldn't we all be criticising, saying, well, I think they're sticking the muds and they won't try and change the game?
They're obviously coming from a point, you know, they're like, it's 100% the GAA's viewpoint is to try to improve the game, you know, make it more attractive, etc., but make it better for players.
But are they treating the symptom more than the cause? I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I think think we probably need more games, don't we, really? I'd say the administrators too are looking forward to there being a bit more commentary about kind of incidents and matches, and for the league to start and for us all to get absorbed in that.
Exactly, rather than giving out.
We're already absorbed, we've been starved.
Yeah, because I think it was 95% of there's 96% of GPA players said they didn't want the changes.
Yeah, certainly for the hand-pass rule.
Managers definitely always don't want change, but managers, particularly in football now, they're obsessed with retaining possession, not losing possession, and making as little errors as possible. Yeah. And that form of coaching has created, definitely, I think everybody has agreed at this stage, a game of football that doesn't look as attractive and isn't as dynamic maybe as it was in the past. I don't think some of these rules are going to work. I don't think they're necessarily, and some of Joe Brawley's suggestions, I remember thinking at the time, were really good. Yeah. But they didn't get through. And that's what we have. And also the fact is, there's a meeting, I think, in Central Council on January the 19th. Yeah. That's the crazy thing, that some of these things mightn't actually
have bedded in yet.
Yeah. But they might even
get out. Yeah.
They might now decide, okay, no, it didn't work and we're not going to have them in the league. That's the madness, I think. That's a bit crazy. You've got players trying to learn new rules, and then potentially somebody might turn around before the month is over and say, actually, no, we're going to go back to the other one. Like, that is a bit, that's where it's difficult.
But again, do people, which is also kind of an underlying theme in the papers today, I think, do people just want a competitive football or what they feel is a competitive football championship this year? And if that had been the scenario,
but are any of these rules going to give us a competitive football championship?
Like, that's the point. Like, you know, but if that had been the case and people felt that Dublin weren't kind of head and shoulders, would even the level of rule change kind of be happening.
And there's also, Sarah, that there's also the kind of hypocrisy on all of our parts as well, where hurling suddenly was the sexy thing and everybody loved hurling, and wasn't hurling fantastic last year? But as Paul Rouse has been banging a drum about this, and Philip Lanigan has a good piece, hasn't he, today in the Mail about this.
Still a closed shop.
It's still a closed shop. There's still only a tiny number of, now you can say the same applies in football now, I suppose, as well, but like, what's been done to make hurling grow? You know, the weaker counties say nobody's really helping us to make more progress, and those are the challenges. Hurling has challenges as well. It's not like it's perfect.
No, absolutely, it does have challenges, but at the same time, isn't there some kind of magic in the air at this time of year where we shouldn't be looking forward to Gaelic games? Yet today we have Waterford playing Clare, and we have James Horan back in Mayo, and like, I know me wearing my Galway hat, I'll always give Mayo the slag.
You got the dig in early. I heard
in fairness, I mean, I'm just so looking forward to seeing Mayo under Horan 2.0, and I'm obviously hoping to beat them in a Connacht final. But aside from that,
they're playing Leitrim today in Carrick. Yeah. I'd say Park Sean, there'll be loads of curious people in there.
Like, Mayo people are great. They go to all the games. That would be packed today with Mayo people full of hope, and they would be thinking of, this is our year.
And just dying to get out.
Isn't that what's amazing about it?
That's the beauty of sport. And actually, Eamon Sweeney even touches on that in the back page in the Indo today, because he's like, oh, this would be the perfect year. I think he's listed out.
Yeah, all the things he'd like to see. So the World did something similar, and the Mail have something
as well,
similar as well. And Shane McGrath, who's from Mayo, has an interesting piece about James Horan today, hasn't he? You noticed that earlier.
Yeah, I thought it was really, really good about how, you know, he describes how James Horan walked away from that team, and that was a magical evening down the Gaelic grounds.
Unforgettable.
I mean, I know people say she's saying that because she's from Galway. No, it was an amazing evening. It was a spectacle. I've rarely seen the Gaelic grounds full, and when that place is full, you couldn't fit a child in there.
And Mayo playing Kerry in a semi-final replay in Limerick was a magical day. They closed off there were no cars on the Ennis Road that day. Everybody walking up and down for hours before the match. I worked at that game as well, Maire Treasa, and people just could not stop. People were walking up to complete strangers and asked them, what do you think you're going to do? It was a magical, magical evening, apart altogether from the quality of the game that followed.
Oh, the game was immense.
It was taking the game there, doing something different, you know, and that's what we say, we give out about the J. They did something that day, and there were people whinging before and going and saying, oh God, we have to drive to Limerick. And afterwards, people talked about it, and they will never forget.
It was such a great game that I didn't mind. I was driving back to Galway that night, and I got caught in huge traffic, and I left hours after everyone else because I was working, and I got caught in traffic outside Gort, and all the way up I was still thinking that was a great game, and I came in home and I was still saying that's a great game. I was buzzing from it.
It's a game you'll never forget going to.
No,
and it's interesting.
And that is what Mayo do, isn't it? They give us these unforgettable moments.
And I remember Horan Martaz that day. I remember seeing him afterwards, and the press conference afterwards was over, and I saw him walking back over to the dressing room, and I've rarely seen manager as crushed. I thought, oh my God, that guy he's absolutely broken-hearted and he's never going to recover. And to see him going back, I mean, they say in sport, never go back. Liam Sheedy's done it. He's done it. I think they are going to attract huge attention this year because they've gone back, and it'll really be interesting to see what can they get. And that's why Tipperary making the final in Munster, just the pre-season final against either Clare or Waterford. And if it's Waterford Tip, there's a bit of history there from the ghost goal last year.
Yeah.
Like, even early season, we're so excited about that. But Shane's piece is interesting as Maire Treasa, because he says Horn is still going to be working with quite a lot of people.
Yeah, like 12 of his panel are apparently over 30 years old, and that's not old in the grand scheme of things, but in Gaelic game circles, it's certainly getting into grey old man territory. And I just, look, who are we to question James Horan? He may have a few surprises in the bag that we haven't. And we're certainly not going to see them today either. He'll save them for later into the season, but like you said, I do wonder, why did he go back?
Well, I mean, he's a thoughtful person. He hasn't gone back
through. He hasn't gone back on a whim. No. He didn't leave on a whim that day either in 2014.
No.
But
I think he cares. Like, there's an unbelievable passion in Mayo. Like, they have to win this. They have to win this All Ireland. I actually even think there's probably a fair few Dubs fans underneath that he wouldn't begrudge them one at this stage.
Can they be the ones to do the derby, as in do the Seamus Derby, stop the 5 in a row?
Stop the 5 in a row.
Can they do it?
Like, looking from here, I would say no. I don't think anybody can stop the Dublin 5 in a row, simply because of the age profile and the skill and a lot of other things that are feeding in, and even the players at Dublin.
But Mayo were still the only side to push them to the pin.
They were, though. That's
and Mayo made it so hard on themselves. Do you remember those own goals and everything? Oh, Mayo.
Yeah. Well, I think like that's absolutely like the expert objective view, but I think that's ultimately some element the beauty of sport, that the dreamers can still hope. And
absolutely. It's back to the FA Cup thing. It is about that. It's about just believing that there can be that we can create some magic here.
Well, Valerie will be keeping us up to date today with all the results. There's so much going on today, and I know the Waterford one especially and the Mayo thing people be looking forward to. But before we wrap up the papers, speaking of dreaming, there is now, funnily enough, we tend to talk about the sports pages here, but in the Sunday Times magazine, on the back page, if you're perusing it today, there is an interesting article about Eric Cantona, who dreams a lot now, apparently.
He does, yeah. Anybody who is a regular Sunday Times magazine, I love their Sunday Times magazine, A Life in the Day. It's the back page thing, and it's just about somebody's life. And they've done it with Eric Cantona, and it's pretty extraordinary, right? He lives in Portugal now, and he talks about breakfast with his children at 6 or 7 a.m. I like to stand up and sing. My songs are surreal. The words come out automatically. To me, control is boring. Some people get freedom from drinking alcohol. I lose control when I sing. That's the start of it, Sarah.
I think some people need the alcohol to lose control to sing.
He's on my dinner party list now. Certainly. Well, like, it's going to be interesting, isn't it?
It struck me as an article as a man who'd been so constrained by control and rules as a young boy that he's still relishing the fact that he can get up now when he wants to.
Yeah, so I did feel a little bit sorry for him when he said it was terrible, his rules. He had to make his bed, and if he didn't make his bed, he had to pay a fine.
Yeah, when he was in the academy in Marseille. I have very little sympathy for him, I have to say. I love, there's a line that says, football is like politics. It's all about money. My father never spoke to me about money. I had a passion for the game, and he said, if you have a dream, then try. That's it. I know I'm a lucky man. I have everything I want. But in my heart, money still doesn't matter to me. I go in business class now. But if someone said, come back into economy class, that would be okay. And I just thought, wow, the entitlement, the sense of entitlement in this is absolutely hilarious.
Oh,
he talks about freedom and, being in permanent transit in the world.
Yeah, permanent transit, like he doesn't travel, he's in transit. But my favourite piece of it all is, obviously, you think Eric Cantona, you think, obviously, that Kung Fu kick. And it's 1995, which is nuts to think of. I was in primary school at the time. I remember it was all we talked about for weeks. But people think I lost my temper and got so many red cards, but it's a myth. The Kung Fu kick Cantona attacked a fan in 1995 wasn't me. It was a testosterone. I don't regret it. I wouldn't have done it harder, but I wouldn't have done it any less either. And then turns into, in the evening, I love to cook. I love risotto with lemon.
It's like Edith Piaf, Je ne regrette rien. And that's what I never like about Cantona. He never apologised for it. And he got away with it in so many terms. And okay, he got punished for it. But like, people afterwards, didn't seem to regard him any less. I mean, I think somebody who jumps into a crowd and kung fu kicks a player should be banned for life. That's my feeling. Here's my judgmentalism coming out again, because I think, oh my God, that's just the maddest thing in the world to do, and so wrong on every level. If it happened away from a pitch, you know, you'd be in prison or whatever. And I just couldn't believe it. But no, there's absolutely no regrets. And his brain process is just so interesting. He's finishing up his day. We can finally get to the end of the day, Sarah. I'll let you read the end of the day because it's so funny.
Oh yeah, I do like the way he points out that he doesn't get angry or lose his temper with his children. Well, fair play to him, because that's not something I ever manage. But anyway, before bed, I like to get into a lucid dream. Then around 12, I sleep straight until morning. I mean,
what is a lucid dream? I would love.
I'd love to know what a lucid dream is. And I studied psychology, and I still don't know what a lucid dream is. But I just think it's so brilliant. And then I go around 12. I sleep straight until the morning, and then he says I'm up at 6. So is that really sleeping straight to the morning? So is he having lucid dreams for 6 hours? I don't know. And then breakfast is crostini with butter and jam and green tea. At the table with my wife and children, I like to stand up and sing, and I just think of that scene, you know, Step Brothers, when the family are in the car singing along, they have to sing in perfect tune.
And this little article, Maire Treasa, it does, you know, it has those 3 little words of wisdom. It has this little section at the side of it every week, right? And I just think his second one is advice I'd give. Receive advice like love.
So Gaelic.
From a man who I don't think probably takes advice from anybody.
I'd say not.
And
so
I love
that's
as
our
well
motto for the day.
Yeah, and I love as well this bit in the middle. My goal is to do what I love, art. If I can't express myself, for sure I will die. So maybe that's why he did that kung fu kick. If he didn't do it, he would have died.
Perhaps.
But it wasn't him, it was the testosterone.
But it was the testosterone.
It was the ultimate existential crisis. There's also just the imagery of this. It's a very small piece. If I in the middle of the morning I do some exercise. I need to. If I cannot go to the gym, I do weights around the kitchen for 45 minutes. Again.
Then I go in my little car.
And he's a little car. I don't know what the little car is. I'm desperately trying to imagine him doing weights around the kitchen.
Yeah, I think it's probably just as well he was a footballer, because I wonder what else he might have done.
What our creative, obviously, yeah, he's got into acting, but yeah, how would he survived in any other industry?
I just find it like Eric Cantona, of all people, like you can just pick quote after quote after quote, and on their own they stand up as brilliant because they're Eric Cantona. Like the words of wisdom. Best advice I was given. Johan Cruyff said you have to anticipate and see everything before you receive the ball. I apply it to life.
Yeah, and what I wish I'd known, when you meet somebody, it is because it is the right time to meet.
It's just so. I just have more questions. I just want to sit down. I want to bring him over for dinner.
I know this. Well, that's why
she's going to have him in her dinner party you dream to have. And I just love to have him there, Sarah.
I just love to see Cliona's so excited. She's dropping her microphones now at the thought of bringing Eric Cantona in for dinner. It's just that, and one of my favourite lines as well. I mean, they're all favourite lines, but another reason I like Portugal is that I'm not from there. I mean, that's brilliant.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a really telling line, isn't it?
It tells you everything. But I mean, it's great. If you're looking for some entertainment and also a little bit of strange depth, it's the only way I can describe it. Do pull that article out. It's in the Sunday Times magazine. It's the last page, the back. A Life in the Day, they call it. And I think they should do a week with Eric Cantona.
Oh Lord, absolutely, definitely. People would be pulling out the quotes like the seagulls and the fishermen or whatever. Just on that thing of liking to be somewhere where you're not from or whatever. There's 2 good articles in the Sunday Times today. One is on Tyburn and the other is on Marty Moore. Yeah. Dennis Walsh and Peter O'Reilly did them, and I think they're a really good read. I love good Sunday features because both of them talk about how, by going away from Ireland to become, that they weren't thriving in the environment they were in Irish rugby for a variety of reasons, and how going away made them better and how they came back. So I think they're worth reading.
Yeah, and a super one about our 10-pin bowler we spoke about, Christopher Sloan, and his journey from Swords to Sweden.
Where's that?
It's in the Mail.
Mark Galler, he's great.
Mark Galler for getting the...
Yeah, this guy is from Swords or somewhere, I think, and he won a medal at the World 10-pin bowling. I'd never heard of him last year.
There's loads of stuff in all the papers today. You won't be bored, and this time of year you're always wondering what can the papers have, but Also, just worth mentioning very, very briefly before we go, obviously there's stuff in all the papers about Liverpool and Man City, but I think my favourite comment of it all comes from Tommy Conlon. I love how he writes anyway, but in the Sunday Independent he does a great synopsis piece. It's only a few paragraphs long compared to some of the opuses in the papers, but he says the last line, something along the lines of, I don't have it in front of me, but I took a note saying, it's all getting rather Brexity for Liverpool. Forget about Europe, think if nothing else but battle for England. I think it's a good way of appreciating leaving home but coming back and appreciating what home is for. Exactly. So I think that's a good place for us to wrap up the paper review. We've filled our time. Thanks a million, ladies, for coming in. Cliona Foley from Off the Bench, I know you're going to be staying with us for the afternoon, and Sarah O'Connor, the head of sport at WH. Thanks a million for giving us your insight, and thanks for joining us.
Oh, no, thank you very much.
So we're just going to take a quick break. We'll be back very shortly.
Off the Ball on News Talk. News Talk Breakfast.
Tommy in Mayo has texted in. Never heard such rubbish. You can't compare Irish to French or German. Irish is not a spoken language apart from in a few bog